Commander Jake Morrison stood at the control center of the spaceship UE's Valiant. He looked at the screen showing empty space around them. For 3 days now, something strange had been happening. A signal was coming from far away, from a place where no signal should exist. The signal was not like anything they had seen before. It cut through all the normal space noise like a knife through paper. Dr. Lisa Grant sat at her workstation, trying to understand what the signal meant. She had been working without sleep for 2 days straight. Her coffee cup was empty again, but she did not notice. Lisa was good at understanding alien languages. She had learned how to talk to 12 different alien species during her career. But this signal was different. It was not just one voice speaking. Many different voices were mixed together, like a choir of different species all singing the same sad song. Jake walked over to Lisa's station. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. "Any luck with the translation?" he asked. Lisa looked up at him with tired eyes. "I think I'm getting somewhere." "But Jake, what I'm finding is not good news." She turned back to her screen. Strange symbols and wave patterns filled the display. Some parts looked like mathematical equations. Other parts showed pictures that made no sense to human eyes. But slowly, very slowly, the computer was starting to turn the alien language into English words. "The signal is coming from another galaxy," Lisa said. "Not our galaxy, but the big one we can see in the night sky. The one scientists call Andromeda." Jake felt cold suddenly. Andromeda was millions of light years away. Nothing from there should be able to send signals that humans could receive. "Are you sure?" Lisa nodded. "The computer has checked the math 3 times. But Jake, there's more. This isn't just any signal, it's a warning." She pressed a button, and sound filled the room. It was not like human speech. It was deeper, with strange music mixed in. But underneath the alien sounds, Jake could hear something that made his heart beat faster. It was the sound of fear. "What are they warning us about?" Jake asked. Lisa's fingers moved across her keyboard. More English words appeared on the screen. As Jake read them, his face went pale. The message talked about something called the hunger. It was not a creature or a machine. It was something worse. The hunger moved from galaxy to galaxy, eating everything in its path. But it did not just eat planets and stars. It ate the very idea that things had ever existed at all. "This doesn't make sense," Jake said. "How can something eat an idea?" Lisa kept reading the translation. "According to this, the hunger feeds on fear and selfishness. When people stop caring about others and only think about saving themselves, they become weak. The hunger can eat them more easily." The signal continued to tell its story. Long ago, the Andromeda galaxy had been full of life. Millions of different species lived on countless worlds. They had built great cities and traveled between the stars. They thought they were safe. Then the hunger came. At first, it only ate the edge of the galaxy. A few star systems disappeared here and there. The governments thought it was just some kind of natural disaster. They told people not to worry, but the hunger grew stronger with each world it consumed. It moved faster and faster through the galaxy. Species after species tried to fight it, but their weapons did nothing. The hunger was not made of matter that could be destroyed. As the danger grew worse, the different alien species began to panic. Instead of working together, they started fighting each other for resources. They abandoned their colonies on dangerous worlds. They left behind anyone who was too old, too young, or too weak to fight. Every time they chose to save themselves. Instead of helping others, they became weaker against the hunger. Lisa read from the translation. "The entity feeds on the breakdown of compassion." Jake felt sick to his stomach. So the more selfish they became, the easier it was for this thing to eat them. That's what it says. And now almost everything in Andromeda is gone. The signal is coming from the last survivors. Lisa pressed another button. A new section of the message appeared on screen. This part was different. Instead of fear, Jake could hear something like surprise in the alien voices. "They've been watching us," Lisa said quietly. "Watching who? Humans. They've been studying our species for hundreds of years." Jake sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Why would aliens from another galaxy care about humans? Lisa continued reading the translation. Her voice became softer as she spoke. "They say humans are different from every other species they have ever seen. Most intelligent life forms care about their own kind first. When danger comes, they protect themselves and their families." "That makes sense," Jake said. "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing is wrong with it. But humans do something else. Something the aliens have never seen before." Lisa looked up at Jake. "Humans risk their lives to save strangers, even aliens, even enemies." The message gave examples. Human rescue ships that had saved alien crews from exploding space stations. Human soldiers who had died protecting alien civilians during wars. Human doctors who had spent their careers helping sick creatures from other worlds. "They call it the human sickness," Lisa said with a small smile. "The need to protect anyone who is weaker, even when it doesn't make sense." Jake thought about his own career. How many times had he put his ship in danger to help others? How many human crews had died trying to save people they had never met? He had always thought it was just the right thing to do. The message says, "This human sickness might be the only thing that can stop the hunger," Lisa continued. "Every time humans choose to protect the weak instead of protecting themselves, they create something the hunger cannot digest." A new voice came through the speakers. This one sounded older and more tired than the others. Lisa worked quickly to translate the final part of the message. "This is the last transmission from the Andromeda Galaxy," the alien voice said. "In one of your Earth years, the hunger will finish consuming our galaxy. Then it will look for new food. Your galaxy will be next." Jake stood up quickly. "How long do we have?" Lisa checked the computer calculations. "Based on the hunger's speed and the distance between galaxies, maybe 50 Earth years, maybe less." The alien voice continued speaking. "We have watched your species for centuries. You have something we never had. When faced with death, most species become selfish, but humans become more generous. You share your food with your enemies. You rescue those who have tried to kill you. You cannot help yourselves." Jake felt a strange mix of pride and terror. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for being helpful to a fault. Other species often called them foolish for taking risks to help strangers. "The final part of the message is addressed directly to humanity," Lisa said. She cleared her throat and read slowly. "When the hunger comes to your galaxy, do not change who you are. Do not become like us. Do not abandon the weak to save the strong. Your strange human need to shield others may be the only weapon that can defeat what destroyed us." The signal ended with coordinates. The location of the last survivors in Andromeda Galaxy. They were offering to share everything they knew about the hunger, but only if humans promised to stay true to their nature. Jake walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire galaxy was dying because its people had forgotten how to care for each other. And now that same darkness was coming for them. He turned to Lisa. "We need to contact Earth immediately." "And Lisa?" "Yes?" "Send a message to the Andromeda survivors. Tell them humanity accepts their offer. We'll learn everything we can about this hunger." Jake paused and looked back at the stars. "And we'll do it our way." Captain Ryan Peters received their report. 6 hours later. At first, he did not believe what he was reading. An intergalactic threat seemed impossible. But the alien technology broadcasting the signal was real. The mathematics were correct. Something terrible was coming, and humanity had less than 50 years to prepare. Peters authorized an immediate deep space mission to investigate the source of the signal. If the message was true, they needed to learn everything possible about their enemy. And they needed to learn it fast. The fate of the entire galaxy might depend on humanity's greatest weakness becoming its greatest strength. 6 months had passed since the first signal from Andromeda. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UE's Pioneer, watching the view screen with growing horror. They had traveled farther from Earth than any human ship had ever gone before. What they found at the edge of space made her question everything she thought she knew about the universe. The Andromeda galaxy spread out before them like a sick patient. Where there should have been billions of bright stars, Rodriguez saw only twisted shapes and empty darkness. Whole sections of the galaxy looked like someone had taken a giant eraser and rubbed them out of existence. "Captain," said Lieutenant Ben Turner from his position at the weapons station, "I'm reading something impossible. Those star systems aren't just destroyed. According to our sensors, they never existed at all." Rodriguez moved closer to Turner's console. The readings made no sense. Empty space showed no trace of planets, no leftover gas from exploded stars, no radiation signatures that should remain after any kind of destruction. It was as if entire solar systems had been completely removed from reality. How is that possible? Rodriguez asked. Dr. Karen Wells looked up from her science station. She had been studying the scanner data for hours. "Captain, I think we're seeing the hunger's feeding pattern. It doesn't just destroy matter and energy. It consumes the very fact that things existed in the first place." Through the main window, they could see the hunger moving through space. It looked like a living shadow, darker than the emptiness around it. Where it touched star systems, they simply stopped being there. No explosion, no collapse, just nothing where something had been moments before. "It's heading toward the center of the galaxy," Wells reported. "But there's something strange. I'm detecting a small cluster of stars that are still burning. They're protected by some kind of energy field." Rodriguez felt a spark of hope. Survivors? Possibly. The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases, but there's something familiar about it. Rodriguez ordered the ship to move closer to the protected area. As they approached, the sensors began picking up radio signals, human radio signals. "That's impossible," Turner said. "No human ship has ever traveled this far." Wells worked frantically at her station. "I'm analyzing the signal patterns. These broadcasts are old, Captain, really old. The technology dates back almost 2,000 years. "A generation ship," Rodriguez whispered. She had studied the early space exploration programs in school. In the early days of human space travel, some colonies had been launched on ships that took hundreds of years to reach their destinations. Most had been successful, but a few had disappeared without a trace. "The UES New Horizon," Wells said, reading from her computer. "Launched in 2157. Last contact was lost when they reported a navigation error that threw them off course. Everyone assumed they were lost in deep space." The Pioneer received a transmission from the protected zone. An old man's voice crackled through the speakers. "Unknown human vessel. This is Elder Henry Davis of the New Horizon Colony. Please identify yourself and state your business in this system." Rodriguez took the communications microphone. "Elder Davis, this is Captain Amy Rodriguez of the United Earthship Pioneer. We received a distress signal from your galaxy and came to investigate." There was a long pause before Davis replied. "Captain, how long has it been since we lost contact?" "With Earth? Nearly 2,000 years, sir." Another pause, longer this time. "Then you've come a very long way to find us." "Permission to come aboard, Captain. We have much to discuss." Rodriguez took a small shuttle to the colony ships. What she found amazed her. The descendants of the original colonists had built an entire civilization in space. Their ships formed a protective ring around a small artificial sun, creating a bubble of life in the dying galaxy. Elder Davis met her at the docking bay. He was an old man with white hair and kind eyes that had seen too much sadness. As he led her through the corridors, Rodriguez saw families living normal lives despite being surrounded by cosmic horror. "You've been here for 2,000 years?" Rodriguez asked. Davis nodded. "When we arrived, this galaxy was beautiful. Millions of species lived here in peace. They welcomed us, shared their technology, taught us about the universe." His voice became sad. Then the hunger came. They reached a conference room where other colony leaders waited. Davis introduced them as the governing council of the last free humans in Andromeda. Rodriguez noticed that many of them looked tired, as if they had not slept well in years. "Tell me about the hunger," Rodriguez said. A woman named Helen Carter spoke first. She had been the colony's military commander for 50 years. It appeared at the edge of the galaxy about 300 years ago. At first, nobody was worried. Space is full of strange things. A few lost star systems seemed normal. But it grew stronger, added Dr. Robert Kim, the colony's chief scientist. Every world it consumed made it more powerful. And we noticed something else. The species that survived longest were the ones that worked together. Davis leaned forward in his chair. "The hunger feeds on fear and selfishness, Captain. Every time a species chose to save themselves instead of helping others, they became easier targets." Rodriguez thought about the message they had received. At Earth, and humans were different? Carter smiled for the first time since Rodriguez had arrived. When the hunger reached this sector, most of the alien species began abandoning their outer colonies. They pulled back their fleets to protect their home worlds. They stopped rescue missions to save time and resources. "But not you," Rodriguez said. "Not us," Davis confirmed. "We couldn't help ourselves. When we saw refugee ships under attack, we went to help them. When colonies were being evacuated, we sent our ships to assist. When hospitals were overwhelmed with wounded, we shared our medical supplies." Kim pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy's timeline. Every other species that tried to fight the hunger was consumed within decades. "But we've been holding this position for 3 centuries. How?" Rodriguez asked. "The same way humans always survive impossible situations," Carter said. "We protect each other. We share what we have. We never leave anyone behind." Davis stood and walked to the window. Outside, Rodriguez could see human children playing in a park built inside one of the colony ships. "The aliens we've worked with over the centuries taught us something important. They said humans have a sickness. We care too much about people we've never met. And that sickness is why we're still alive," Carter added. "Every time we choose to help someone instead of helping ourselves, we create something the hunger cannot digest." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. "You've been testing this theory for 300 years?" "Not by choice," Kim said, "but yes. Every major evacuation we've organized, every rescue mission we've launched, every time we've shared our resources with refugees, the hunger has slowed down or changed direction." Davis returned to his seat. "Captain, the hunger is almost finished with this galaxy. In maybe 10 Earth years, we'll be the last ones left. And when it's done here, it will move on to the next galaxy. The Milky Way," Rodriguez said quietly. "Your home," Davis confirmed. "But we think there might be a way to stop it. Or at least slow it down enough to give your galaxy time to prepare." Carter activated another display. This one showed detailed scans of the hunger itself. "We've been studying this thing for centuries. It's not just a predator, it's a test." "A test?" Kim nodded. "Every species it encounters faces the same choice. Save themselves or save others. Most choose themselves and get consumed quickly. But humans always choose to save others, even when it makes no logical sense. The hunger has never encountered anything like humanity before," Davis said. In our galaxy, we were the only species that consistently chose to protect the weak. And look at the result. We're the last ones standing. Rodriguez looked around the room at these people who had spent centuries holding back cosmic horror through simple human kindness. What do you need from us? Take this information back to Earth, Davis said. Tell them what's coming. But more importantly, tell them not to change who they are when it arrives. Carter leaned forward. Every other species we've worked with eventually gave up their humanitarian missions when things got dangerous. They started choosing efficiency over compassion. The moment they did that, the hunger consumed them. Humans are different, Davis said. You can't help but protect people who are weaker than you. Even when it's stupid. Even when it's dangerous. Even when it gets you killed. Kim smiled sadly. We've watched this galaxy die because its people forgot how to care for each other. Don't let that happen to the Milky Way. Rodriguez stood up. We need to get you out of here. Evacuate your people to our galaxy. Davis shook his head. We can't leave, Captain. As long as we're here, the hunger has to focus some of its attention on us. That gives Earth more time to prepare, but you'll die here. Maybe, Carter said. But our deaths will mean something if they give humanity time to organize a real defense. Rodriguez felt tears in her eyes. These people had been fighting a hopeless battle for centuries, not for glory or victory, but just to buy time for others to escape. There is one more thing, Davis said. We've been sending signals toward the Milky Way for 50 years. Other human colonies should be receiving them by now. If we're right about human nature, you're P.O. The news from Andromeda hit the Galactic Council like a bomb. Ambassador Helen Carter stood at the speaking platform in the Great Hall, looking out at representatives from over 200 different species. She had just finished explaining what Captain Rodriguez had discovered, and the reaction was exactly what she had feared. Panic filled the room. Alien voices spoke in dozens of languages, creating a noise that hurt Helen's ears. The Zephyrian delegation was already standing up to leave. The crystal beings were flashing angry colors. The insect-like mantids were clicking their claws together in agitation. High Chancellor Vexthal of the Zephyrian Empire stood up first. His blue skin was darker than usual, which Helen knew meant he was angry. This is impossible, he declared. No single entity can destroy an entire galaxy. The evidence is right here, Helen replied, holding up the data storage device from the Andromeda survivors. We have detailed scans, battle reports, and 300 years of observation data. Chancellor Vexthal waved one of his forearms dismissively. Even if this hunger exists, it is millions of light years away. We have time to prepare proper defenses around our core worlds. Helen felt her heart sink. This was exactly the wrong response. Chancellor, the data shows that defensive strategies focused on protecting home worlds have a 0% success rate against the hunger. The crystalline Confederacy representative began to glow with a red light. When crystal beings turned red, it meant they were making important decisions. We propose immediate evacuation of all Outer Rim territories, the crystal being announced. All species should withdraw to the galactic core, where we can establish better defensive positions. More voices joined the discussion. The silicon-based architects wanted to build massive shield walls around their star systems. The energy beings suggested retreating to different dimensions until the threat passed. Species after species presented plans that had one thing in common. They all involved abandoning the weak to save the strong. General Paul Bennett, Earth's military representative, stood up slowly. He was an old soldier who had fought in 3 different wars. His uniform was covered with medals, but his face showed no pride, only sadness. With respect to all delegates, Bennett began, every strategy you've mentioned has already been tried in Andromeda. They all failed. The room became quieter, but Helen could still hear suspicious whispers in alien languages. Bennett activated a holographic display that showed the Andromeda Galaxy's timeline. The first species to fall were the ones who immediately retreated to their core worlds. The hunger consumed their outer territories, grew stronger, then took their protected systems easily. Then what do you suggest, human? Asked the mantid hive mind. The insect creatures spoke with one voice that came from all of them at once. We protect everyone, Bennett said simply. We evacuate civilians from threatened areas. We share resources with weaker species, and we never abandon anyone to save ourselves. The room erupted in angry voices again. Chancellor Vexthul's skin turned almost black with rage. That is suicide. You cannot protect billions of beings across thousands of star systems. The human military doctrine is inefficient, declared the Silicon architects. Their mechanical voices showed no emotion. Protecting weak species reduces defensive capability by 37%. Helen stepped forward again. May I remind everyone that the only survivors in Andromeda are the humans who followed exactly that inefficient doctrine? Dr. Nancy Foster, humanity's lead expert on alien psychology, requested permission to speak. She was a small woman with gray hair, but her voice carried authority that made even the largest aliens listen. I've spent 30 years studying how different species react to crisis, Dr. Foster began. Almost every intelligent race follows the same pattern when faced with extinction. They become more protective of their own kind and less concerned with others. She activated her own display showing brain scans from various species. This is a natural survival instinct. But the hunger doesn't follow natural rules. According to the Andromeda data, it feeds on exactly this kind of thinking. The crystal being flashed yellow, which meant confusion. Explain how an entity can feed on thoughts. Dr. Foster nodded. The hunger isn't just consuming matter and energy. It's consuming the social bonds that hold civilizations together. Every time a species chooses self-preservation over helping others, they create fear and division. The hunger feeds on that fear. But humans are different, added General Bennett. When faced with danger, most humans become more generous, not less. We share our food with our enemies. We rescue people who have tried to kill us. We can't help ourselves. Chancellor Vexthul stood up again. And that is why humans are a weak species. Your emotional thinking makes you vulnerable. Helen felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. Chancellor, which species is still alive in Andromeda? The logical ones who protected themselves, or the emotional humans who protected everyone else? President Alice Thompson had been listening quietly from the human section. Now she stood up and walked to the center of the hall. She was the elected leader of the United Earth government, and her presence commanded respect even from species that disagreed with human policies. Fellow delegates, President Thompson said, we understand your concerns. Protecting the weak instead of protecting ourselves seems illogical. But we're not asking you to trust our emotions. We're asking you to trust our results. She gestured to the Andromeda data. For 300 years, human colonists have held a defensive position against an entity that destroyed billions of other beings. They did it by never abandoning their humanitarian principles. The mantid hive mind clicked their claws together in thought. The human strategy has statistical support, they admitted. But it requires sacrificing the strong to save the weak. This violates basic survival logic. Does it? Asked Dr. Foster. Or does it follow a deeper survival logic that most species never discover? She brought up a new display showing the hunger's attack patterns. Look at the data carefully. The hunger doesn't just attack randomly. It targets civilizations that have become internally divided. Species that abandon their humanitarian missions become easier to consume. General Bennett nodded. Every time humans in Andromeda organized a rescue mission or shared resources with refugees, the hunger's advance slowed down. It's like the entity has trouble digesting acts of pure compassion. Chancellor Vexthal was still not convinced. Even if your theory is correct, the logistics are impossible. The Zephyrian Empire alone has 12 billion citizens spread across 40 star systems. We cannot evacuate everyone. We're not asking you to evacuate everyone, President Thompson replied. We're asking you to never stop trying. The moment you decide that some people are worth saving and others aren't, you become vulnerable to the hunger. The energy being spoke through a translator device. This strategy requires trust between species that have been enemies for centuries. The Zephyrians and the Crystal Confederacy have fought 3 wars in the past 200 years. Then maybe it's time to stop fighting, Helen said. The hunger is coming whether we're ready or not. We can face it divided and weak or united and strong. The debate continued for hours. Most delegates remained skeptical of the human approach. The Silicon architects calculated that humanitarian missions would reduce military efficiency. The crystal beings worried that helping refugees would drain their resources. The Zephyrians insisted that protecting their core worlds was more important than saving outer colonies. Finally, President Thompson stood up one last time. We can't force you to follow our strategy, she said. But we want to make humanity's position very clear. The hall became quiet as every delegate waited to hear what Earth's leader would say. When the hunger reaches our galaxy, humans will respond the same way we've always responded to threats against innocent people. We will organize evacuation fleets. We will share our resources with anyone who needs them. We will never abandon the weak to save the strong. She paused and looked around the room. We know this strategy seems foolish to many of you. But it's not just our military doctrine, it's who we are. General Bennett stepped forward. Any species that wants to coordinate their defense with humanity is welcome to join us. But we will not change our principles to make others comfortable. Chancellor Vexthal stood up angrily. Then you will die foolishly, humans. The Zephyrian Empire will establish proper defenses around our vital systems. One by one, the major powers announced their own defensive plans. The Crystal Confederacy would retreat to the galactic core. The Silicon architects would build automated defense platforms. The energy beings would phase out of normal space-time. But as the large delegations prepared to leave, something unexpected happened. Smaller species began approaching the human section. The Verdani, a peaceful plant-based civilization, asked if they could coordinate their evacuation plans with Earth. The Aquatic League requested human assistance in moving their water-based colonies. Dr. Foster watched the pattern with interest. The younger species are more willing to try our approach, she observed. Helen nodded. They haven't learned to be cynical yet. By the end of the council session, 12 species had agreed to work with. They were not the most powerful or advanced civilizations, but they repay. Captain Tony Walsh stood on the bridge of the UE's Guardian, watching the edge of known space through the main view screen. 3 years had passed since the Galactic Council meeting, and now the hunger had finally arrived. The reports coming in from the outer rim colonies were terrifying and strange at the same time. Captain, said Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from the communications station, we're getting another distress signal from the Kepler sector. The colony ship New Amsterdam just vanished from all sensors. Walsh nodded grimly. This was the 5th ship to disappear in 2 days. But these weren't normal disappearances. The ships didn't explode or get destroyed. They simply stopped existing, as if they had never been built at all. Any sign of the hunger itself? Walsh asked. Commander Rick Davis, his second in command. Check the long-range sensors. Negative, sir. But we're detecting the same reality distortions that preceded the other disappearances. Whatever this thing is, it's moving faster than our projections suggested. Walsh looked at the tactical display showing the current human fleet positions. Unlike the other major species, humanity had not pulled back to defend their core worlds. Instead, They had spread their forces in a thin line across the galactic rim. Admiral Kate Sullivan had called it the shield wall strategy. The idea was simple but dangerous. Human ships would not try to stop the hunger directly, since weapons had proven useless against it. Instead, they would focus on evacuating civilian populations from threatened areas and maintaining escape routes for refugees. "Sir," Mitchell called out again, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the evacuation fleet at Kepler 442b. Colonel Maria Santos is requesting immediate support." "Put her through," Walsh ordered. The face of Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos appeared on the main screen. She looked tired and stressed, with dirt on her uniform and worry in her eyes. Behind her, Walsh could see the controlled chaos of a military evacuation in progress. "Captain Walsh, we have a problem," Santos said without preamble. "The Verdani evacuation is taking longer than expected. We've got 3 million plant-based life forms that need special transport containers, and we only have enough equipment for half that number." Walsh felt his stomach tighten. The Verdani were one of the species that had joined humanity's coalition. They were peaceful farmers who had never hurt anyone, but their biology made evacuating them extremely difficult. "What are your options?" "Colonel?" Walsh asked. Santos looked over her shoulder at something off-screen. "We could evacuate all the humans and Verdani military personnel right now. That would save about 400,000 lives. Or we can stay and try to save everyone, but that means we'll still be here when the hunger arrives." Walsh knew the choice that most species would make. The logical decision was to save who you could and leave the rest behind. But he also knew what Santos would choose, because she was human. "What do you need from us, Colonel?" Santos smiled for the first time during the conversation. "Every transport ship you can spare, sir. We're not leaving anyone behind." Walsh turned to Davis. "Reroute all available ships to the Kepler system. Strip the escorts from the supply convoys if necessary." "Sir," Davis said quietly, "that will leave our other evacuation sites vulnerable." "Then we'll have to work faster," Walsh replied. "Send the orders." As the Guardian's escort ships broke away to help with the Verdani evacuation, Walsh received reports from across the shield wall. The same scene was playing out on dozens of worlds. Human forces were stretching themselves beyond their limits to save alien civilians they had never met. On Proxima 7, Captain Linda Parker was using her medical ships to treat wounded refugees from 6 different species. Her doctors worked around the clock, sharing their limited supplies with anyone who needed help. The logical choice would have been to treat humans first and aliens only if resources allowed. But Parker's crews couldn't bring themselves to let anyone suffer. At the Wolf 359 station, Commander Bob Wilson had converted his military supply depot into a refugee camp. Thousands of alien families lived in converted cargo bays, eating human military rations and sleeping on human military blankets. Wilson's supply chain was stretched to the breaking point, but every time his staff suggested prioritizing human needs, he refused. "Captain," Mitchell called out, "we're getting a transmission from Admiral Sullivan." Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the screen. She was aboard the command ship U.S. Defiant, coordinating the entire shield wall operation from the galactic rim. Like Santos, she looked exhausted but determined. "Tony, I need a status report on your sector," Sullivan said. "We're holding the line, Admiral, but barely. The hunger is moving faster than expected, and our evacuation operations are behind schedule." Sullivan nodded. "Same story everywhere. We're trying to save too many people with too few resources." She paused. "I've received communications from Chancellor Vexthal and the other major powers. They're offering to take in human refugees if we abandon our current operations." Walsh felt anger rising in his chest. "What did you tell them?" "The same thing I told the Zephyrian rescue coordinator yesterday, when he offered to evacuate only our military personnel," Sullivan replied. "We don't abandon our mission. The transmission was interrupted by an urgent alarm from the sensor station. Ensign Mike Thompson, barely out of the academy, looked up with fear in his eyes. "Captain, I'm detecting massive spatial distortions heading this way. The hunger is coming." Walsh looked at the tactical display. The entity was still hours away, but they could already see its effects on local spacetime. Stars were beginning to flicker and fade as reality itself became unstable. "Admiral," Walsh said, "we need more time to complete the evacuations." Sullivan's expression became grim. "I know. That's why I'm implementing Operation Last Stand." Walsh had heard rumors about Last Stand but hoped it would never be necessary. "Admiral, that's a suicide mission." "Not suicide, Tony. Sacrifice. We're going to put our heaviest ships directly in the hunger's path. We can't stop it, but we might be able to slow it down." Walsh understood immediately. The plan was to feed the hunger something it had trouble digesting, acts of pure selflessness. Every human ship that chose to face the entity to protect others would create a small delay as the hunger struggled to process such behavior. "How long do you need?" Sullivan asked. Walsh looked at his evacuation timeline. 8 hours to finish the current operations. 12 hours to evacuate everyone in this sector. "I can give you 6 hours, Sullivan said. "After that, the hunger will be too close to the inner systems." The next 6 hours were the longest of Walsh's life. Across the shield wall, human ships moved into defensive positions not to win a battle, but to buy time for others to escape. The crews knew they were flying to their deaths, but they also knew their sacrifice would save millions of innocent lives. Dr. Charles Kim, monitoring the hunger's approach from a deep space observation station, noticed something unprecedented. "Admiral Sullivan, you need to see this data." Sullivan looked at Kim's readings with surprise. "The hunger is slowing down?" "More than slowing down, ma'am. It's having difficulty processing the sectors where human forces are operating. Every time one of our ships performs a rescue operation or shares resources with refugees, the entity seems to struggle." Walsh received this information as his own ship moved into position to face the hunger. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency, knowing they were about to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect people they had never met. "It's like the thing is getting sick," Kim continued. "Our humanitarian operations are creating something it can't digest properly." As the first human ships encountered the hunger, something remarkable happened. Instead of being instantly consumed like other civilizations, the human vessels seemed to cause the entity actual discomfort. The hunger writhed and slowed as it tried to process beings who chose death before abandoning their principles. Sergeant Bill Hayes, serving with Santos on Kepler 442b, summed up the human response perfectly as he helped load the last Verdani families onto transport ships. "We could save twice as many humans if we left these plant people behind," he told his colonel. Santos looked at him with the same expression that humans had worn for millennia when faced with such choices. "The moment we start choosing who deserves to live based on species, we become exactly what the hunger wants us to become." The shield wall held for exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes. In that time, human forces evacuated over 12 million civilian refugees from 17 different species. The cost was enormous. 47 human ships were consumed by the hunger, along with their crews, but as the surviving evacuation fleets retreated toward the inner systems, they carried with them proof that humanity's approach was working. The hunger had been slowed, confused, and actually damaged by its encounter with beings who refused to abandon their compassion, even in the face of cosmic horror. Admiral Sullivan, aboard one of the last ships to retreat, sent a final message. "To the refugee fleets, Phase 1 of the shield wall is complete. All civilian populations have been evacuated from the outer rim. We're falling back to establish defensive positions around the core worlds, but everyone listening knew the truth. The shield wall had never been about defending territory. It had been about proving that humanity would never change who they were, no matter what the... Admiral Susan Blake stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, looking out at the largest collection of refugee ships in galactic history. The Centauri cluster had become a massive camp in space, with over 2 billion beings from hundreds of different species waiting for transport to the inner systems. Behind them, the hunger approached like a wave of absolute darkness. "Admiral," said Captain Dan Cooper from the communication station, "we're receiving final evacuation requests from the outer perimeter. The last transport ships are requesting permission to dock." Blake nodded. "Grant all docking requests." "How many ships do we have left in the evacuation fleet?" Dr. Frank Miller, the fleet's chief scientist, looked up from his research station. 800 transport vessels, 200 medical ships, and 150 military escorts. Against a force that has consumed entire galaxies. Blake had spent the last week studying Dr. Miller's research into the hunger's true nature. What he had discovered changed everything they thought they knew about their enemy. The entity was not just a predator hunting for food. It was something far more complex and terrifying. "Tell me again about your theory, Doctor," Blake said. Miller activated a holographic display showing the hunger's movement patterns across multiple galaxies. "Admiral, I believe the hunger is a cosmic test. It appears at civilizations that have reached a certain level of development and forces them to choose between survival and principle." "A test administered by whom?" asked Commander Jane Ross, Blake's second in command. "Unknown," Miller replied. "But the pattern is clear. Every species that chooses self-preservation over helping others becomes easier for the hunger to consume. It feeds on fear, selfishness, and the breakdown of social bonds." Blake looked out at the refugee ships again. Human crews were sharing their food rations with alien families. Human doctors were treating wounded creatures they couldn't even pronounce the names of. Human engineers were working around the clock to repair damaged ships belonging to species that had been enemies just years before. "But humans are different," Blake said. Miller smiled sadly. "Humans are the first species the hunger has encountered that consistently fails the test in the right way. We choose to protect others even when it makes no logical sense." Lieutenant Pete Anderson at the tactical station called out urgently. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting massive reality distortions. The hunger will reach the outer perimeter in 6 hours." Blake turned to address her senior staff. "Ladies and gentlemen, we all know what we're facing. Every conventional weapon has proven useless against this entity. Every defensive strategy based on self-preservation has failed." She paused and looked around the room at faces she had worked with for years. Good people who had joined the military to protect others, not to achieve glory or power. "But we have one advantage that no other civilization has possessed. We're going to give the hunger something it's never had to digest before: pure, uncompromising human stubbornness." The plan was simple in its audacity. Instead of fighting the hunger, the human fleet would continue their humanitarian mission even as the entity consumed them. Every ship would maintain its evacuation operations until the moment reality itself erased them from existence. Dr. Miller believes that our compassionate actions create something the hunger cannot easily process, Blake explained. "If we're right, our sacrifice might damage the entity enough to save this galaxy." Captain Lisa Parker, commander of the medical ship UES Mercy, spoke up. "Admiral, what about the refugee ships? We could evacuate all human personnel and military assets." Blake shook her head. "The moment we abandon our mission to save ourselves, we become like every other species the hunger has consumed. We stay with the refugees until the end." "Commander." Ross activated the ship-wide communication system. "All vessels, this is Admiral Blake. Prepare for Operation Final Shield. Continue evacuation operations regardless of approaching threat." Maintain humanitarian assistance to all refugee populations. This is our last transmission as a free human fleet. Across the Centauri cluster, human crews received their final orders with calm acceptance. They had known this moment would come. They had spent their entire careers preparing for situations where they might have to choose between their own lives and the lives of others. On the hospital ship, UE's Hope, Dr. Sarah Williams continued treating wounded Zephyrian children, even as the ship's sensors detected reality distortions approaching. Her staff worked frantically to stabilize patients for evacuation, knowing they would never see the patients reach safety. "Doctor," said Nurse Tom Jackson, "the last evacuation shuttle just left. We're alone out here." Williams looked around the medical bay at the alien patients who were too injured to move. "Then I guess we stay here and do our jobs until we can't anymore." The transport ship UE's Courage, under Captain Mark Davis, had loaded beyond maximum capacity with Verdani refugees. His ship's life support systems were failing under the strain, but Davis refused to leave anyone behind. "Captain," his engineer reported, "if we take on any more passengers, we'll lose atmospheric integrity." Davis looked at the hundreds of plant-based families still waiting for evacuation. "Then we'll hold our breath. Load them up." As the Hunger reached the outer edge of the cluster, something unprecedented began to happen. The entity, which had consumed galaxies with ease, started to slow down and struggle. Each human ship it encountered created a kind of cosmic indigestion. Dr. Miller watched the readings with amazement. "Admiral, the Hunger is having severe difficulty processing our vessels. It's like it's trying to digest something fundamentally incompatible with its nature." Blake nodded grimly. "How long can we keep this up? Every ship we lose weakens us, but also weakens the Hunger. If enough human vessels maintain their humanitarian mission, we might actually cause permanent damage to the entity." The first ships to encounter the Hunger directly were the forward evacuation vessels. The transport ship UE's Guardian, carrying 3,000 alien refugees, simply ceased to exist as the entity touched it. But instead of the smooth consumption the Hunger had experienced with other species, the process was violent and painful. Captain Roy Thompson, aboard the UE's Defender, maintained communication with the refugee fleet even as his ship began to phase out of reality. "All civilian transports, this is Captain Thompson. Continue evacuation procedures. We're holding the line." His voice became fainter as the Hunger consumed his vessel, but his last words were clear. "Remember us not for how we died, but for who we chose to protect." Ship after ship faced the same fate, but each human crew maintained their mission until the very end. Medical ships continued treating patients as reality collapsed around them. Transport vessels loaded refugees even as their hulls began to fade from existence. Combat ships formed protective screens around evacuation routes, knowing they would be consumed first. Admiral Blake, aboard the Defiant, watched her fleet disappear one ship at a time. But something extraordinary was happening. The Hunger, which had moved through previous galaxies like an unstoppable force, was now writhing in apparent agony. "It's working," Dr. Miller reported with wonder in his voice. "The entity is experiencing something it's never encountered before. It's trying to consume beings whose final thoughts are about protecting others, not saving themselves." As the Hunger reached the Defiant, Blake opened a final communication channel to the remaining refugee ships. "To all beings receiving this transmission, this is Admiral Susan Blake of the human fleet. Our mission is complete. We came to the stars not to conquer, but to explore. We built alliances not to dominate, but to learn." The ship began to shake as reality became unstable around them. Blake's voice remained calm and clear. "When the darkness came, we chose to stand between it and those who could not protect themselves. This is what it means to be human. Remember us not for how we died, but for why we lived." The Defiance communications officer, Ensign Amy Clark, continued transmitting even as the ship faded from existence. The weak will always need shields. Be their shields. The last human ship disappeared from the Centauri cluster, but the hunger was no longer the same entity that had consumed Andromeda. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered something that hurt it deeply: the complete absence of self-preservation in the face of cosmic horror. The entity writhed and twisted, unable to digest the pure altruism it had consumed. Every human crew that had chosen death before abandoning their principles had damaged something fundamental in the hunger's nature. Slowly, painfully, the cosmic predator began to retreat from the Milky Way. It was not defeated, but it was changed. The entity that fed on fear and selfishness had gorged itself on love and sacrifice, and it could not handle the combination. The refugee fleets reached the inner system safely, carrying with them the survivors of hundreds of worlds. They established new colonies and built monuments to the species that had saved them. On every world, the same message was carved in stone: here stood humanity. They taught us that true strength lies not in what you can take, but in what you choose to give. The weak will always need shields. Be their shields. Years passed, and the galaxy began to heal from its encounter with the hunger. The surviving species, inspired by humanity's example, began to work together in ways they never had before. Rescue missions be